10 Reasons Why Being Gay is Okay, Bible Edition. 1. The Mosaic Law only pertains to the ancient Israelites. So first, what was the Mosaic Law and why was it given? The law was God's covenant or contract with the Israelites. If they were able to follow the laws, they would be holy, set apart from the sinful world. Being holy would allow them to be in God's presence in the tabernacle. Another purpose of the law was so that the people would consciously live for God, as they always had to check their actions. Sexual relations was one of the aspects that the law touched upon, and this is where Leviticus 18 comes in. Leviticus 20 is the part of the law that talks about the punishments. How is this relevant today? The thing is, this covenant is already fulfilled, which I'll get into later. The issue is that people quote the word abomination, or sometimes detestable, and use it to define the nature of male-to-male sexual relationships. However, the word translated to abomination or detestable is tova. Scholars agree that tova does not indicate what's morally right or wrong. Instead, it refers to something that must be done for ritual cleanliness. In other words, when God says to the Israelites that something is tova, it means that they should make themselves distinct by not doing that thing. Remember, the purpose of making these rules was because God wanted a way for them to purify themselves. Today, Christians are in a new covenant with Jesus that does just this. Which brings me to the next reason. 2. The law is completed with Jesus. In Galatians 2, Jews who were persecuting Gentiles for not following the law and Jewish customs. In verse 16, Paul rebukes them, stating that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. What he means is that Christians are not bound by the law because it's faith in Jesus that makes one worthy to God. In Galatians 3:28, Paul states that as Christians, worldly differences don't matter. There's no male and female, and dare I say it, no straight or gay, because Christians are one in Jesus. So again, gender doesn't matter. Faith in Jesus does. Some people might argue that gay people can't be Christians, which is ridiculous, but I'll point to 1 Corinthians 6:9-10 and 1 Timothy 1:8-10 and claim that the Bible clearly states that homosexuals aren't going to heaven because they're sinful. Let's have some context. So in 1 Corinthians, Paul is writing back to churches because they have problems. In chapter 6, there's two parts. The first part is verses 1-11, where Paul is scolding them because despite being Christians, they're taking each other to court for trivial problems, even though they're all sinful. He says it would have been better to just be wronged instead of being a wrongdoer. The verse that people use against homosexuals is in this first part, in verse 9-10. The second part of Chapter 6 is verses 12-20, where Paul tells Christians to flee from sexual immorality and devote their bodies to God. In 1 Timothy, Paul sends Timothy to the Ephesian church to confront leaders who were spreading false doctrines about the law or the Torah. Some examples were forbidding people to get married and telling them to abstain from certain foods. In this letter, Paul explains that the law is good if people recognize that it's for sinful people, which starts the passage where homosexuals are inserted in. Paul's point was that the law was meant to expose people's sin, which would lead them to repent, see God's mercy, and grow in faith and love. There's a problem though. In 1 Corinthians verses 9-10, the word homosexual typically replaces two words, malakoi and arsenokoitai. In 1 Timothy, the word homosexuality replaces a similar word, arsenokoitais. Understand, the word homosexuality didn't come into our vocabulary until the 1870s, and it wasn't until recently that people started to understand sexuality. There were a lot of speculation on what made people gay, leading to a popular theory that homosexuality was a mental illness. It wasn't until 1973 that it was declassified as a mental illness in the DSM. Now keep in mind that the word homosexual was first introduced in the Bible in 1 Corinthians in 1946, which is almost 30 years before homosexuality was taken down from the DSM. So during the time the RSV translators decided to use the word homosexuality, people still had a lot of misinformed views on it. But why did they decide to use it? The word malakoi refers to someone effeminate or having the negative traits of a woman, such as being morally weak. Gay men were seen as effeminate and were often attributed the negative traits of a woman too, hence gay slurs related to women. One definition for the word arsenokoitai comes from the words it's comprised of, arsen meaning males and koitai meaning bed. Roughly, it would translate to men having sex with men. However, uses of the word in other ancient writings suggest that it's associated with pederasty, exploitation, and idolatry. Note how even if it tied into men lying with men, it was translated to homosexual, which implies both a man and a woman. The bottom line is that this was a mistake in translation. Next, let's go over Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 27. You can go ahead and pause the video and read it for some context. I'll jump right into it. In Romans, Paul is writing a letter about the gospel to churches throughout the Roman Empire and hopes to unify differences between Gentiles and Jewish Christians. He starts by talking about God's righteousness by first explaining how the world fell into idolatry, resulting in sinful behavior. This is where Romans 1:21 to 27 falls in. His explanation goes like this. People knew God but rejected him, and so they fell into sin, turning away from natural to unnatural sexual relations. Just like they abandoned their natural inclination to God, they abandoned their natural inclination in sex. But what exactly is natural and unnatural sex to the Gentiles? Did they see having sex with opposite sex as natural, while having sex with the same sex as unnatural? Well, it's not as clear-cut as that. It was more about becoming greedy and trying to satisfy their unquenchable lust. Let's take a look at a famous 1st century Greek philosopher who spoke on this. Dio Chrysostom states in the Euboean Discourse that the man whose appetite is insatiate in such things will have contempt for the easy conquest and scorn for a woman's love as a thing too readily given, and will turn his assault against the male quarters, believing that in them he will find a kind of pleasure difficult and hard to procure. This is similar to the type of logic that Paul is using. People were so obsessed with indulging themselves in their worldly pleasures that they abandoned God and their self-control, that they committed lustful sins. Paul isn't talking about loving, committed gay relationships, but of lustful relationships where God's love is not present. Number 5. Marriage is spiritual between Jesus and the church. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 30 to 31 states that marriage is supposed to represent Jesus' love with the church, which is all Christians, regardless of gender. I like to argue that what matters in marriage is not that it's between a man and a woman, but that it exemplifies Jesus' love. Number 6. Love is based on your heart and actions, not based on your gender. We can see this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7, where it talks about God's love. Notice how it doesn't say it's limited by what gender you are. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Number 7. Everyone has their own gifts. This needs a little background. So in Matthew 19, the Pharisees tasked Jesus with questions about divorce, and after answering them, the disciples wonder if it's better not to marry. Jesus then replies, "Not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it." Here, Jesus uses the concept of eunuchs. What does he mean by eunuch? I think we can understand Jesus by first understanding why people should get married. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is giving advice about marriage because similarly, some disciples are questioning whether it's better not to get married. However, while Paul wishes that everyone can live a single life like him, he acknowledges that everyone is different and has their own gift from God. He goes on to advise those who burn with passion to get married so that they can control themselves better. So one of the purposes of marriage is to regulate your own sexual desires. When Jesus talks about eunuchs, we can infer that he isn't saying that there are certain people who absolutely cannot get married. I'm saying this because some people believe that gay people fall under the eunuch category and should not get married. Jesus is saying that people have different circumstances on why they don't get married. Some people have low sexual desire and don't need marriage to regulate their passions. Others are prevented from getting married by others, and there's people who choose to remain single and devote themselves to God. Note how he emphasizes that not everyone can accept this word. What exactly is this word? Is this word the fact that some people can get married? I don't think so, because if they can accept it, they will still get married. I think this word is referring to people who remain single and don't need to get married. Those who can accept the unmarried life should accept it. All to say that this verse isn't saying that gay people shouldn't get married. Everyone has their own gifts. Number 8. Don't force yourself to change. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verses 17 to 20 is a continuation of Paul's advice on marriage. People were wondering if they should get married or divorce their non-Christian spouse, or if they should remain single. But Paul takes it further to say that they shouldn't try to change other aspects of their life as if it was an obligation. I think it's safe to say that we can apply this to being gay. Some people may think that, for whatever reason, God wants them to change and be straight. But isn't that the debate about circumcision? It's nothing. What matters is that they live for God. Number 9. 2 are better than 1. For the people who still think that gay people should just remain single, hear this. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Some people might say, but it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Well, God gave Adam a companion, who we know as Eve, but that doesn't mean all men are Adams and should have their own Eve. Everyone is different, and everyone can have their own suitable helper that God gives them, whether they're male or female. And last but not least, number 10, love one another. One common thing people think is that if you're gay or act on the gay, you'll go to hell. But being straight doesn't mean you'll go to heaven either. Let's look at the people who do go to heaven. Matthew 25, verses 31 to 40, tells a story of a king who's dividing his sheep and goats, sheep on the right and goats on the left. He tells the sheep that they have pleased him as they clothed him and helped him when he was in need. The sheep ask when they did this, and the king answers that because they have showed love to others, they have showed love to him. On the other hand, the goats were cursed because they did not show love to others and therefore did not show love to God. So the sheep were righteous, and that's why they were accepted in heaven. Isaiah 58 verse 6 describes God's righteousness. God loosens the chains of injustice and every yoke of oppression. What kind of people do you think are those who create more chains of injustice and yokes of oppression by persecuting people like the LGBT community? Are they righteous sheep, or are they cursed goats? So there you have it. 10 reasons why the Bible doesn't say being gay isn't okay.